Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I am your host, Maryann Petri. You can find me, my books, and blogs on dismantlingfamilycourtcorruption.com. I've got a brand new guest on. I have attorney Kim Korven on. She's a retired attorney and mediator from Calgary, Canada. Now, she's a former attorney who helps people navigate divorce more effectively within the family court system. She has also started the program UNSHACKLED, Your Divorce Rebirth Incubator. And we're going to have a great conversation as to how you started UNSHACKLED. When did all this begin?
Well, I thank you so much, Maryann. That's such a big question.
I know. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. So, um, the short answer, I guess, is I ended up, married, and I remember when my husband proposed, my whole body was screaming, "Say no, say no!" And I thought, I don't know how to deal with it if he cries. Like, yuck, right? And then I thought it's going to be an 8 hour drive home, and that's going to be really awkward.
Mm,
So, how bad could it be?
mm.
So I said yes.
Oh,
So, not surprisingly, the marriage wasn't very strong, right? And when I started thinking about ending it, and that was a long process, but when I decided, hey, my kids are being harmed by us staying together, and I really, really wanted to blame him, I did.
mm,
But then I remembered when he proposed and went, oh crap, I can't blame him. I said yes when my entire body, everything was screaming, say no. My head said, oh, it would be okay. And so I think that's really when it started, because it was from that mindset I was able to figure out how to divorce peacefully from a husband who wanted to stay married.
mm.
Um, and I ended up, but I was not going to help people in this area, right? Like, I was a land titles expert. Heaven forbid that I should be working in the area of divorce. Um, and then I had a cousin who was going through a really ugly divorce battle, traditional divorce battle in court. He was hardly getting to see his kids.
Mm, mm, mm,
And he walked off the face of the earth, and his body was found over 3 months later.
mm.
And that was the moment when I started thinking, I need to figure out what I did so more kids, so more families don't go through that kind of trauma. And so it led me into this mediation and consulting practice, um, of helping people actually not just divorce peacefully, but really put their kids first. Unshackled is about being able to do it at scale, getting mums together
Mhm.
to do it at scale. So you actually did end up with a long answer, but there you go.
Right, because it's all about the kids. And I mean, set aside any child abuse charges. People should be able to co-parent effectively.
Mhm.
Maybe,
Well,
maybe.
and it was well, and I think, the other thing I remember doing a child protection file where a child had been pulled from mom's care. And I was court appointed counsel for mom. So there was lots of issues. But mom was very, very resourceful and found a social worker to support her through the process. And I mean, we appeared in front of the same judge many times. And it started out, there was a police officer in the back of the courtroom because of mom's potential erratic behavior.
Mhm.
But the social worker would always say, children love their parents no matter what.
Hmm.
So when I was looking at divorce, thinking about divorce, that had stuck in my mind,
Mhm.
right? Regardless of what you think about this other person, kids, that's the other parent, and your children love that person.
Hmm.
So it's having to keep that front and center in a system where the children aren't parties to the action. So we talk about the children as being important, but the way the system's set up, they are important, but they're kind of off on the side
Hmm. Hmm.
instead of instead of everything being focused on how do we do this well for them,
Hmm.
right?
Right. I have seen kids paraded in front of the courtroom and have them sit in the jury box for for what? I don't know why they were there. And then they were taken back and put into the sequestering room where the judge and the attorneys would talk to them. Very strange. They don't get
Very,
that trauma.
and it's because when you start from the perspective that kids love their parents no matter what, and of course in our society, for whatever reason, we seem to equate if you love somebody, you have to like everything they do, which isn't true with love, right? It's that's not the truth of human relationships.
Hmm.
You can love somebody and be really disgusted at something they do,
Hmm.
and other moments really like how they're behaving. And children shouldn't be put in that position of, oh, how do you know, of having to say, I like this, right? It's just, it isn't fair to them.
Hmm.
And triangulation, of course, is known. It's a form of conflict that harms kids. So, and I had never, what was funny, I used to say that there was no conflict in my first marriage. There was just lots of tension,
Hmm.
because there wasn't yelling or screaming or, oh, no, no, there was no conflict. And then I did a TEDx talk on can divorce foster resilience in children? And in the course of my research, I came across an article and it was like, silent conflict harms kids too. And silent conflict includes that tension and passive aggressive behavior. So since then, I've been acknowledging, oh, yes, there was conflict in my first marriage. But at the time, and what I saw, and my son gave me permission to share his story in my TEDx talk, right? He's almost 25 now. But his behavior was horrific
Hmm. Hmm.
living in with that conflict. And I mean, he even, about a year after we separated, and he was competing in a judo tournament, and he lost the match in like less than a second. And then he got off the mat and he yelled at the top of his lungs, I want him dead.
Oh.
Yeah, I see your face. Yeah, like it was really, really bad.
Hmm.
And 6 years later, he was at an elite championship. I'm the manager of his team. And these other parents initiated this conversation with me and they said, wow, he is such a wonderful human being. He's kind, he's helpful, he's a real team player. And I'm basking in this. Oh, look at this, this kid who had all these issues. And then it came out. It was their son, whom my son had wanted dead, right? Like I had completely blacked out the identity of the other child.
Oh no.
It was too horrific. But
Um,
it that was actually part of the evolution of how I help people divorce because it was a real, oh, once his parents were no longer in conflict, he could regulate. He could start growing into who he's meant to be. And so it's a real example of why co-parenting, it doesn't end for the kids with a divorce decree.
hmm. Hmm.
right? It's this, you know, it's the balancing of the relationships. And I there's a woman where I live, and she was the first female real estate broker in Canada, right? In the 1960s. She was going to meetings with all these men. She was very, very successful. She's late 90s now, but I asked her once, what what's your best memory?
Mm.
And any idea what she said?
She wished she never got married.
No, she said it was the birth of her first child.
Mm. Mm.
And it was a profound moment for me because when you can get people remembering, oh yeah, like a really good memory was the birth of our children, because both parents will think that when you ask them what are your best memories from the marriage, and then you take it further. Well, what are your hopes and dreams for your children, to get them on the same page and to look at what actually creates an adverse childhood experience here. Like the conflict between you is an adverse childhood experience. So it can be a really beautiful transformation.
So one of my friends sent me something from Facebook where they interviewed an elderly lady and they asked her a similar question. What would you have done differently in your life? And she said, never get married. And that's why when you asked me that, I thought that's probably what it is.
Well, and I'm sure there's lots of elderly women who think that, and some not so elderly women who think that, right?
Yeah, it's sad. Well, I think what it is there's so many more personality disorders out there than there were maybe 60 years ago. I'm just
Mhm.
saying. Or perhaps we didn't study personality disorders heavily back 60 years ago either.
Well, and I think there were fewer options. And of course, divorce, it used to be a real stigma.
Mhm.
And it still is stigmatized, but I'm kind of like, why is it stigmatized when 40% of all marriages, roughly end in divorce?
Mhm.
Hello. Um, and it used to be like it in the British legal system, divorce was put in the civil court system in 1857. And there had to be a reason. Somebody had to have done something very, very badly
Mhm.
to get divorced, and it had to be published in the local newspaper before you, like, it was just trauma inducing.
Hmm.
And with no fault divorce, which is you live separate and apart for however long the government says is appropriate, you don't need to attach any blame to the other person. But the language in the documents continues to have that kind of blame and shame,
Mhm.
dating from an earlier time period. So, for example, I was doing mediation with a couple, and she served him with a divorce petition at work, which I'm like thinking, oh no, this does not help
Mm-mm.
at all. But when he responded with an intent to defend, she phoned me up and he doesn't want to settle anymore. I guess we're going to the lawyers. And I'm like, hold on. What, and let's talk about this. And where her concerns were coming from was in the legal form. It said he was contesting her petition,
Mhm.
right? He's not agreeing. So I had to say, well, that's legalese. It's okay. It doesn't mean that he wants to fight in court. It's just that's the language
Hmm.
that's used in and please just keep your eye on the prize.
Hmm. Yeah.
Right? But it's how those seemingly inconsequential things can get in the way of settlement
Hmm.
and get in the way of putting the kids first, keeping the kids front and center.
Right. I think when you have parents that are not personality disorders, this is it very easy to do. Would you agree?
Yeah, and but it can happen when parents have issues too, right? Out
Hmm.
of love, because kids love their parents always, and parents love their kids too. So it is to connect there. Like I was in, I doubted myself so much at the end of my first marriage that I didn't think I deserved anything else. Like it was just okay. But for the sake of my kids, I ended the marriage, right? Like we will do really hard things for our children that we wouldn't dream of doing for ourselves. And it's connecting people to that because sometimes, like I'll do mediation, and one of the people is clearly very, very controlling.
Hmm. Hmm.
But what's interesting is they want to be liked,
Hmm.
and it's hurt people hurt people. So to approach it from, yeah, your kids are always going to love you. We all make mistakes. It's okay. I've actually helped people negotiate really beautiful settlements.
Where were you back in 2015?
I still had my job doing non-family stuff. So
Oh,
there.
so you're a good negotiator, but how did judo come into your life?
So my judo came into my life a long, long time ago. So my brother was in judo and I was in brownies, and I thought judo was far more interesting. So the next year I started judo too. I was 9 and I loved it. And I loved and I should say I think I'm a child of my parents are still alive. They've been married over 60 years now. And I think it's really only about the last 5 years that they've been really happy together.
Oh, yeah,
So,
yeah.
so I'm a child of parents who I know what happens when parents stay together when they're not happy
Hmm.
and what it does to your self-esteem and the emotions it can bring up. So judo was a great place to be physical
Hmm.
and to give me a survival mechanism and a space to excel. So I ended up, yeah, I was a fierce competitor, really, really fierce competitor. And even yeah, I came in third in the nationals for my when I was 15, for the youngsters. But I loved the philosophy of judo,
Hmm.
um, which judo means the gentle way in English, hence the Gentle Way Divorce Consulting Group,
Hmm.
which is the name of my business. But there's two main principles to judo, and the first one is maximum efficiency with minimum effort,
Hmm.
and the second one is mutual welfare and benefit. And that those and I was young enough when I started that I didn't even realize, but I just took them in and they became part of me, those principles. And they really underscore my approach to divorce,
Hmm.
right? The maximum efficiency with minimum effort. So it's how do we get through this um, as efficiently as possible? and the mutual welfare and benefit. Like that was part of what got in the way of my legal practice is, I used to, uh, uh, an attorney's job is to be a zealous advocate for their client. And when I was still going to court, and this is a long time ago, but I would say to my clients, hey, do you want to pay me or do you want to have money for your children?
Hmm. Hmm.
Right? It was less about their legal rights and responsibilities, even then. But my job was legal rights and responsibilities. So and when you take it, when you think about like you have kids together, you're always going to be a family. So you don't like it, too bad, so sad. That is the reality.
Hmm. Hmm.
And what's the impact of this behavior having on your children?
Well, when I was going through the divorce process, a talk show host said children would rather grow up outside of a broken home than inside of a broken home.
And it's true,
Hmm.
right? Like I'm the the last 5 years my parents have been happy. And I'm sure if they hear this, they're going to say, Kim, I'm going to get a lot of, they're going to say that they were happy. It was great. And part of that is because how the human brain and memory works is it's based on where we are today, not on what actually happened then.
Hmm.
And I think the biggest thing that actually transformed my divorce was, as I say, that remembering, oh crap, when he proposed, what my instinct said. So then I dug deeper and I thought to myself, what are my best memories from our time together? So
Hmm.
when I told him, I shared, right? It wasn't, you've got this problem and this problem and this problem, and I hate you. No, because that would just make him defensive and we would be fighting.
Hmm.
I actually led with a really good memory,
Hmm.
and the fact was it was while we were still dating. And so we weren't, and I said, we're not bringing out the best in each other, and our children deserve our best, deserve to have parents at their best,
Hmm.
right? And so it was, and I didn't run to court, you know. I'd figured pretty much, I dragged him along, don't mistake that. But I basically had everything figured out about here's what we can do. And it wasn't you need to pay me child support and then I'll pay the mortgage because I'm in the house. It was just keep paying the mortgage, paying the property taxes. Kind of much like when we were talking before we hit record, what the agreement that you and your former spouse had.
Hmm.
And it wasn't, right? So he didn't feel rejected.
Hmm.
He was still part of the family. And what it did was it gave him the opportunity, well, it gave both of us the opportunity to kind of land and settle. Because if you run to a lawyer and you're going to court right away, you're locking yourself in
Hmm.
likely before you're ready to.
Right. They're jumping the gun just because you're going through a divorce. You've got to think for yourself. You've got too many people chirping in your ear saying you should go to that attorney. He's really good. Go to that one.
Yeah,
She's really good. Oh yeah, she's a bulldog. You know, it's like
I know.
just like put the brakes on that. And people have got to just talk to each other. And people may find they can mediate even just between themselves as well.
Oh, and it's beautiful if they can. That's the best.
Right. Right. It can be done, and I know I know very few people that can do it though. That's the problem.
Well, but you're feeling like a failure. And it's like we have this curtain. between everyday life and the legal system, which really leaves people feeling intimidated because so many people who phone and want to work with me are, I don't know what to do. How do I do this?
Hmm.
Okay. And that's part of the background to Unshackled. And I'm also putting together a video series called My Lawyer Free Divorce Boot Camp.
Hmm.
So people who, it is really simple, and really simple would look like, yeah, you're married, you have kids, you rent a place, you don't have pensions, you've got cars and furniture and a little bit of money in the bank. That's really simple. It isn't like everybody likes to think, oh, this is really simple. And and inside my internal voice is going, this is not simple at all. So I've spelled out, this is really simple, right? And get along and can do things themselves. Yeah, and I don't know where I started from there. So I'm just going to be quiet.
Well, some people, as we were talking earlier before we recorded, you can divorce amicably and things go, it can go rocky sometimes, it can go decently sometimes. But then when the other person remarries or finds somebody else, then the court system comes into the process and the legal abuse comes into the process.
Hmm.
Then what do you do? Then you, you can't even mediate when that happens because we tried that.
Well, well, it depends on the mediator, I think.
Mhm. But it's hard
And
for a mediator. I didn't mean to interrupt, but uh, it's hard for the mediator when you have a personality disorder that disagrees with you as the mediator and gets up and walks out of the room and slams the door. Then,
yeah,
then what do you do? I mean, as a mediator, as a negotiator, you throw your hands up in the air. Uh,
well, and yeah, I mean, because like mediation is voluntary, and there are some situations where court is best. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, the reality is, yeah, but it's to be in a position, and sometimes mediation can work and other times it won't. That's
Mhm.
okay.
Mhm.
And one thing, like I advocate fit with attorneys, with mediators. I never did when I was an attorney.
Mhm.
That didn't matter. It was just, here's my hourly rate, pay me my retainer. And people need to ask the right questions when they're hiring somebody. Now, some mediators are trained
Mhm.
in um, in all of these issues during separation and divorce. Okay, and it's recommended that we screen for domestic violence. I follow those practices,
Mhm.
but I know other people who do mediation um, who don't, right?
Mhm.
And it's really important, I think, to make sure that who you're working with matches the situation and is somebody you can trust. So, like a lot of, I don't know what other mediators do, but I know my onboarding process for mediation is I have like a 20 to 30-minute conversation with each spouse. And I'm actually looking for, what do you want your life to be like? What's getting in the way?
Mhm.
And I'm screening there too for, are they into blame? Are they taking some responsibility? Are they really putting their kids first? Like, is there this appetite to do that?
Mhm.
And, and they want to talk about price. And I'm like, at this time, I'm like, no, I don't share my fees until I have both of you on the call because that would be unfair advantage to one of you.
Mhm.
Um, because I want people to be able to succeed, to
Mhm.
be able to settle. So it's what process can I have in place to do that? And I mean, and I've talked to some of the people who I've done consulting with, who've said, oh, yeah, he phoned a mediator and she was like, yeah, yeah, I'll work with you. And I get on the phone with her and she's, oh, so this is really, really straightforward. And then I share my story. This is what my client said. And that mediator, there was this pause. Oh,
Mhm.
right. Like I'm very clear about, I don't think when I've talked to one spouse that I know what's going on because people have different perspectives. That's truth is not absolute, right?
Mhm.
So it's to set it up for success. So when things start to go sideways, it isn't listen to your she's a bulldog.
Mhm.
You really need no, it's and to be able to have that hard conversation first with your spouse and say, look, when we started out and this and this and this was our agreement and things were going well, why did we do that?
Mhm.
Right? Why did we do that? What was important? What led us down that path instead of hiring attorneys? To get to, oh, the kids, yeah. So with what's happening now, are we staying true to our original, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
How is what we're doing now, what impact is that having on the children? And I mean, I'm not a psychologist or therapist or any of it, but I know from my personal experience how children will act out. They don't have the words. So what's happening with their behavior?
Mhm.
And do you want to get this back on track for them? Is how I would initiate the discussion. It wouldn't be about me versus you. And if they're wanting to go there, I'd say, is this helping our kids? Whoa, 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 whoa. Is the approach we're taking, is it helping our kids?
Mhm.
Let's just have that discussion, is right. And I don't expect the two, like, can we find somebody to work with us to help us get back on track for the sake of our children?
Mhm.
And and it's interesting, like, so I tend to run late. I think I mentioned that already.
Uh,
But I was running late for a band concert one night because our son played in many, many bands and it was a school band concert. His dad, my former spouse, and you notice I use my former spouse. I don't say my ex,
mhm.
far kinder to him and to my kids
Mhm.
to change the language. But I send him a text and say, because he's on the parent planning team.
Mhm.
Hey, can you save me a seat beside you? Because I'm running late, because the auditorium would completely fill up. Yeah, no problem. So I get there 2 minutes before the concert starts, and I'm like, hey, where are we sitting? Because he's at the table at the door, and he said, you're not sitting beside me. But then he said, this mutual friend of ours had arrived. Stacy came and I asked her to save a seat for you beside her. Now, I could have chosen to be offended because he said that he would save a seat for me beside him, right?
Mhm.
So, strictly speaking, he didn't keep his word.
Mhm.
And it would be easy in this situation to take offense because our society promotes take offense at whatever this person does. And I just kind of thought, this is so him.
Mhm.
And I thought, and I'm actually far happier sitting beside Stacy.
Mhm.
We can have a visit. He did me a favor. In
Right.
terms of the intent of what I needed, it wasn't to sit beside him. I needed a seat.
Mhm.
And he facilitated that. So is what you're taking offense to, does it really matter? Is it going to matter? down the road. Just let it go if it's not. And I, for the first 8 years after we separated, I could get really angry really quick. And I would always tell myself, Kim, there's a reason you're not together. Just let it go. Let it go, Kim. Let it go. 8 years I had to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And now it's like, okay, whatever.
It's a very fine balance. And I notice when this is what I'm hearing from other parents is when they remarry or they get involved with someone that they are going to marry, then they all get hauled into a courtroom and then
See,
people start taking custody away.
what was interesting when I got remarried, so our schedule after we separated was he always had the kids. Um, July long weekend, always.
Mhm.
I got married July long weekend, 8 years after we split up. And so he actually read me the riot act about you're taking time away from the kids, right? In this phone conversation. Because with him, it was whenever something would happen once or twice, then it became a tradition and it always had to be that way. So he was quite upset. And I, listened to him. I didn't, because that had been my pattern when he'd be upset. I would just be quiet, as so many women are.
Mhm.
But I was so mad getting off that phone. And my current spouse, he's saying to me, Kim, what is it you always tell yourself? Don't you always tell yourself to let it go? And I'm like, I'm not letting it go this time. So I phoned my former spouse back and I said, look, you're talking to me about how I'm always taking time away from the kids. And I said, look, I just want you to know something. Those times when the kids are with me and I ask you to drive them to activities, I'm not doing it because I need you to drive them to activities. I'm doing it so you can have a more organic relationship with our children.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I forget what else I said, but I stood up for myself, and that's when I stopped, and he backed down then. Oh,
Mhm.
okay. And that's actually, I think, when our relationship became less rocky, right? And more sure-footed. But we didn't go to court because I said, no, no, think again, buddy.
Yeah. Eh, but some people you can reason with, and some people there's no reasoning with them. And especially if they remarry someone perhaps who is connected to the system. I've talked to parents who their exes have married, their exes were law enforcement or caseworkers. They're at an extreme disadvantage, and that's where things get really, really ugly.
Mm-hmm.
It all
I
goes
agree.
to pot there. Because I remember, at least in my case and maybe other people's cases, you go to an attorney because things start going sour. You
Well,
can be
the
co-parent.
the the interesting thing, if you can stop and ask yourself, hey, do I want to have money? Do I want to pay a lawyer or an attorney, or do I want to have money for my kids? Take my kids on a nice holiday. Because the reality is, you go to court, you're spending a minimum $10,000. And it's all well and good. And the way the system is set up, like in Canada, the average cost of high conflict divorce is $54,000 a person.
Mm,
But the billing structure is like if you were asked to pay at the front end $54,000, you'd say absolutely not. But it comes over time, right? In
mhm.
bills. So you have no idea. And as we're talking, I'm just thinking my biggest mediation package is $10,000 between the two people.
Mhm.
So $5,000 each. I have people who say, that's way too much. And they actually then find a much more cost-effective way to do it, which involves a lot of conversation between themselves.
Mhm.
Win, win.
Mhm.
So if people actually knew, and sometimes people don't believe me when I say that, they're like, oh, Kim. And I'm like, no, no, that was from a judge. And that's what my attorney told me when I was thinking, we're not going to be able to sign this separation agreement. We're going to have to go to court. And she just said, hold your jets, Kim. And so with somebody new, um, it's if you already have like it's talking to your spouse. And I think the other thing is like people are far happier if they can have the decision make the decision themselves. And really, I would be pushing for, um, even in court, we need to go to mediation, and the new spouse needs to be part of it,
Mhm.
right? Because that's actually what happens when people are actually involved in the decision is they make better decisions.
Mhm.
And I think what really makes me sad, and I'm not just saying that, it does really make me sad, is that we live in a culture, and I mean, the United States and Canada, we both were British, like there's British colonies in both countries.
Mhm.
So the legal system has the same foundation. Do you know where the word custody started?
Was that with parents patriae? Something like
No, it's a property law term, right? So
right.
part of plunking divorce into civil law, there's property law terms, and our society, when the rules came into being, divorce came into being this way, children were property.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And that makes me so very, very sad that sometimes they still get treated as property.
Mhm.
And if you claim, like I always kind of, when you have people who've split up and the new spouse makes the kids call her mom
Oh
or
yeah.
call him dad. And I'm like, this is so weird. Like they have a mom, they have a dad. And,
Mhm.
it's like, hello.
Right, because when I remarried, my kids said, "What do we call him?" I said, "You call him by his first name."
Hmm.
And I told my current spouse, I said, "If they give you a hard time about anything or sass you back, don't discipline them. Just come to me and I'll handle the disciplining."
Hmm.
But,
Exactly.
when you have a judge yelling at everybody saying, "Don't call do not badmouth the other parent," right? They all say that. Don't badmouth the other parent and don't call the other parent mom or dad. It's like, well, I'm not doing it. I was not doing it.
Well, well, and I'm smiling at this because the human brain doesn't process negatives. So sometimes as a wake-up call to illustrate this, and I'll have you do it. Close your eyes.
Okay.
Just close your eyes, Maryann, and I want you to picture an elephant,
Okay.
right? And it might be in a zoo, it might be in India, it could be in Thailand, right? Just
Mhm.
picture the elephant, and I don't know if it's a calf or a cow or a bull. Just picture it. Don't picture the elephant. Whatever you do, do not picture the elephant. Okay, what happened?
Then there's nothing to picture.
Could you stop picturing the elephant when I
Yeah,
said don't picture the elephant?
right.
Because most people can't. The brain does not process negatives. So it's like with little kids when you say stop yelling and they keep yelling and you just get madder and madder. You need to say, use your inside voice.
Mhm.
The brain does not process negatives. So to say, don't badmouth the other parent, you're setting them up to badmouth the other parent.
Mhm.
And it's really, to break it down, what does effective communication look like between you? Right? What example? How do you want your kids to be able to communicate when they get older? Is this going to be okay?
Well, what will happen next is, from what I've heard from other parents, is that well, we'll say problem parent will block that other parent off of phones, iPads, landlines, so there's no contact. So, but then when that parent gets the kids for that weekend or their 5 days, and that child needs to call the other parent because they left a school book at the house, they can't get through to that parent to make that phone call because the parent's been blocked off that phone. And that's really sad to have that because I've seen the look in my child's eyes when I said, "Oh, you're not gonna be able to get through it." And he tried to get through, and I said, "Yeah, I'm blocked off of everything." So, I
Well,
was,
and it's, sometimes it's to be able to say to the kids, you know, I know you love dad.
Mhm.
And you know how sometimes, I bet there's been times when I've done things that you haven't liked, right? Same with him. You're going to love him. And, adults are just people and they do silly things sometimes and they don't realize, it's like, it's just part of life. And if you can accept that, it's really good learning. It's really good training for becoming an adult.
Mhm. Mhm.
So then you don't personalize. And because when my daughter started telling me, we had a conversation once when she was about 10, how she didn't want to go to her dad's.
Mhm.
And she shared her reasons. And I said, we don't want to go to court. We go to court. You're going to be with him fifth half time. And you're saying you don't want that. So, and she didn't believe me.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's what does mom know about any of this? But I ended up saying, look, yes, you always have macaroni and cheese on Tuesdays and you eat at 5:30. And yes, you always have pizza on Friday nights at 5:30. I said, but with me, you know, we could be eating anytime between 5 and 9, and it could be a bowl of cereal.
Mhm.
Like it's just two different, very different ways of being. And this is such wonderful training for life.
Mhm.
And you're always going to love him. So just get over yourself. You need a relationship with him.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, and that's actually that conversation is when I first said, you can love somebody and not like their behavior. That's part of it. It's okay. So it's to be able to say, I wish it was different.
Mhm.
But adults do stupid things. Kids do stupid. It's part of being human. And sometimes we act in a really short-sighted way. This is one of them. And I've done it too, not this specific thing. And you're going to have that conversation with dad about this. If I wasn't blocked, I would.
Mhm.
But you're going to have to and you know, you're going to have to be able to say, Dad, I needed, I forgot this at your house. I needed it for a school project. I couldn't reach you. How do we avoid this happening again?
Mhm.
And 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 it is actually a really good life skill for a child to be able. And I know it's, I don't know how old I was before I started having difficult conversations with my parents. right? But to be able, to have one parent who's kind of the voice of reason and to take it a further step and go, I don't know, like your dad's going to respond to this however your dad responds. It has nothing to do with you or how you've presented it. That's all dad.
Mhm.
That's just who he is. And if you can accept that, this is really good training for life.
It is. Um, then they eventually got cell phones of their own.
Yeah.
Then what the other parent finds out is that other parent is continuously calling that child on that other parent's time. The game playing is starting.
Well, and the thing is, it's also really good opportunity to train kids in boundaries,
Hmm.
right? Like you do not have to pick up just because somebody calls you,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
You don't.
this
And
isn't
it's real,
Pavlov's dogs.
no, right? Like, no, and it's the potential, for the other parent getting back to potentially mediation is to say, um, you know, how about we set it up so if our child wants to speak with you, our child can reach out.
Right, right. Yeah,
And it's interesting. Like I'm talking a lot about mediation, but I know the clients who I've worked with one-on-one and then who've been in a little community I've run too, because that being part of community it's way so very, very good for empowerment, but to go from thinking, oh, I'm going to talk and this person I'm going to have to get this other parent to agree with me.
mhm,
And now, being way better at boundaries, thanks to the work
mhm,
and going, yeah, no, we disagree. You know, we disagree. And
mhm.
just saying, yeah, like you think this and I think this, and this is how I'm approaching this when the kids are with me. And it could even be that, it could even be having a rule. I've never thought of this before, but I think I like the thought of it. So when the kids are with you, if you have a parent who is wanting to use, to still control the child, um, of course, we know the research is there that a lot of screen time causes anxiety for kids,
Mhm.
right? Um, so it could just be a rule that mom, because I'm talking to a mom, it's screen free time when they're with mom, except for maybe 30 minutes a day
Mhm.
so that
Mhm.
they can communicate with their friends. And this is just good self care. So it isn't aimed at the other parent, but it is just good self care. And it also then, if this parent is contacting the child 10 times a day,
Mhm.
um, you can see that and take screenshots so that if you do end up in court, it isn't just he said, she said. It is no, like they're with me and look at this.
Mhm.
I took the screenshots. Boom.
Mhm.
Pretty powerful. And the child doesn't, and you're off your phone too, right?
Mhm.
You all get your phones, so you're modeling it too. And I think that is actually, you know, far superior Like it's the maximum efficiency with minimum effort principle at work, right?
Hmm.
Because going head to head with him, you're going to lose.
Hmm.
You're going to come across as whiny and, oh, and why should this matter? He just loves his kids. But it's just like, no, lots of screen time, it doesn't help kids. So we're just going to have an experiment, kids, for the next 3 months. We're
Hmm.
going to see how it goes. And I always, with a big change, I always help parents think about it. Present it to your kids like it's an experiment. Because if they think it's going to be forever, you're going to get a lot more pushback than let's
Hmm.
just do it for 3 months and see how it goes. And then maybe mom and the kids are sitting down and watching TV together,
Hmm.
or you're working on a puzzle together, or you're cooking together. All of these different kind of things to really build a strong bond
Hmm. Hmm.
and keep your kids healthy.
Definitely. It's all for, if they only get one childhood. This is what's so sad. They only get one childhood to go around. You can't, this is not a repeat process. And so many parents that are dysfunctional are just using kids as leverage
Yeah.
against the other parent.
Well, it's this notion of kids as property.
Right.
And it isn't just using them as leverage, but it's that I was thinking this morning with one of my cats, right? Like we think our pets are lesser beings, but then I'm thinking, but let's look at this. I feed you and I clean your litter box. Who's
Hmm.
the servant here?
Hmm. Exactly.
And and really we should be servants for our kids, not to get them everything they want, but to help raise them into really good human beings.
Hmm.
And what's interesting, when I work with people, I've got this really great exercise that gets parents thinking about their kids differently and hopes and dreams differently. And in the mediation process, when I use it, even when there is significant like I always say hurt people hurt people. So when there's one parent who's unregulated, or I'm not a psychologist, I'm not, but some of the issues you've alluded to, it really changes a conversation because they've never had a conversation like that before.
Hmm.
And so the dynamic of control is lifted for a short time, which means there's space to create something different.
Hmm.
And I remember working with one couple, and they had been long divorced, and I had been really ugly. And at the end of the 3 hour session with me, he said, "Wow, we have talked more this afternoon than we have in 4 years, and it's all been about our daughter."
Hmm. Yeah.
So, when you can do the pattern, and I guess that's what I'm really good at, and it's the pattern interrupt. And I mean, like with judo isn't about winning with force,
Hmm.
right? It's not about two equal forces and one triumphs over the other. It's about using the other person's momentum against them.
Hmm.
Okay. And that's a lot of this. And even with narcissist coercive control,
Hmm.
if you recognize where that person is starting from, and if you can get away from this adversarial model where thinking one person wins, one person loses,
Hmm.
the reality is in court, nobody wins.
Hmm.
And it may sound facile, but my first ever trial was small claims, and it was about a fence. And my client had built a fence. Um, And the owner of the land was supposed to reimburse my client for the materials and didn't. This is how we ended up in court. They brought a board from the fence to trial, which completely freaked me out. Baby lawyer that I was. How am I going to deal with this? Like, there was a knot hole in the fence board.
Oh no.
And the court ended up found for my client, but said my client wasn't entitled to get reimbursed for the taxes on the fence materials. And I'm excited. Like, I am so excited. Justice has prevailed,
Mm-hmm.
was what I thought. But what do you think my client thought?
Well, they want everything paid.
Yeah, he was furious. He wanted to appeal over less than $100. I mean, this is how long ago this was. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like, what is going on here? Justice prevailed. The judge didn't listen to me. And I took in the 30-day window where he could have appealed in that time, I took an intensive training in reality therapy,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. William Glazer. And so one day when I was walking, because this so puzzled me, how could he not be happy? We won. And I thought back to the first conversation I had with him, where he had told me it was his daughter and grandkids lived on that lot and it was a busy street.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted them to be safe. So the next time we had this conversation about potential of appealing and he was upset, I said to him, why did you build that fence? Right? Like, what was his why? Simon Sinek now, why did you build the fence?
Mm-hmm.
And he was silent and he, started to bluster. I said, no, why did you build the fence? And finally, I said to him, wasn't it to keep your grandkids safe?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you told me when we first met. With that, he was calm. He was fine. Oh, yeah. His grandkids are safe. That was the most important. But with the legal issues, that was completely lost.
Mm-hmm.
So it was that getting back to what was most important. So I learned very early on that people aren't happy when somebody else decides their fate,
Mm-hmm.
even when they win.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to get parents talking, or even like when I do the consulting work, I'm the ghost, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who helps the parent communicate differently with the other parent. They get the email full of blame and shame that's 2 pages long, and they want to respond with a big justification email.
Mm-hmm.
And I read it and I'm like, no, and it might be 2 sentences. This is how you respond. We're doing a pattern interrupt here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so even when they do have that controlling spouse and they end up in court, they're much more empowered. They understand the system because I do translation as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mentioned with that, oh, he's contesting. That's just the legal verb for, he doesn't agree,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't agree with everything you want. It's okay.
Well, that's true. I mean, there's got to be give and take. However, not with a personality disorder. I
Well,
don't know.
but you can, both of you can win. It's how you define winning. And when you get really clear, and I mean, if there's coercive control, you're
Mm-hmm.
much more likely to see a woman be killed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, what does winning look like to you? Like, if winning fits within the legal parameters, he's going to win. He knows how to play the game. But if you set up a different win, right? And to start from a perspective of I want the kids are most important to me. Like I'm like with somebody who's controlling, you do not lead with what's most important. And I have a blog post on this. You lead, got to figure out what's really important to him, and you have some throwaway issues that you raise so he can win,
Mm-hmm.
right? and you have so that you can win. But it's really setting that up at the front end. What does winning look like for you? What's most important? And
Mhm.
what can you let go? And I mean, the other thing with negotiation, a lot of uh, women with controlling spouses think, well, I'm just going to be reasonable and he'll be reasonable. So I'm going to start with a reasonable position. Doesn't work that way.
Mm-mm.
People don't change just because you're not together. And that was the best piece of advice I got going through this. They don't change because you're not together. If this person has never been reasonable in the relationship, they are not going to be reasonable now. You have to start asking for more than you want so that there's room for him to win, him or her to win.
I agree. This
It's an
kind of,
art.
yeah, it is. It is. I mean, this has been so fascinating. I could talk to you all day. Even when we talked on the phone, we talked for quite a while. That was great.
Well, you could always have me back,
I will
Maryann. It's
always, yeah,
okay.
I would like to have you back. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, if people are kind of intrigued, moms, if you're intrigued by anything you've heard, like there's actually really good resources
Hmm.
at gentlewaydivorce.com in the blogs. There's stuff on costs and on negotiating with a narcissist and
Hmm.
the divorce from hell,
Yeah,
which is
that's
with um, so there's different things. And also I would love this new program, Unshackled, your
hmm.
divorce rebirth incubator. The women who are signing up right now, because it starts late January, and the women who are signing up, what I'm seeing is they're women who are really smart,
Hmm. Hmm.
really good moms, and they're women who like to gather information. And a lot of them are on the fence, like, do I end this or don't I? I mean, a few are in it, but it's about getting information so they can make a decision. Because I share a lot of information in it, like about the history of the legal system. And when I've run smaller versions of this, women have said, I didn't realize how important it was to know the history of the legal system,
Hmm.
because it empowers you. And then, even in terms of dealing with your attorney, if you're in it, you're much stronger and can make, right? Like you'll avoid some of these going to court
Hmm.
and save yourself $10,000, if oh, this is the potential outcome. That's not what I want.
Hmm.
The fallout from this, you'll have a more holistic. Um, and there's the sister circle. It's basically a mastermind 3 times a month will be part of this program,
Hmm.
where it's women who know supporting women who know, not about victimhood. There's no poor me.
Hmm.
This is really SHITTY. I don't know if your listeners would take me swearing or not, so I'm being sensitive to that. But it's really going to be a good program, and I would encourage,
Hmm.
if the thought of that has people going, oh, to reach out to
Hmm.
me either through you. I've shared the information about it
Hmm.
with you, Maryann, or to reach out to me directly via my website, gentlewaydivorce.com. There's a space to book a consultation there. So,
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, I will have you back. This was fascinating because we need to just stop the shenanigans of running into court. Just because you're getting a divorce doesn't mean you have to run into court. I always tell people this.
yeah. Well, and people can actually decide just about everything themselves. Court needs to end the marriage, but everything else, there's lots of room to figure out yourself.
Mm.
And I say, divorce, it's just a life event,
Hmm.
right? When you got married, when you got engaged, you didn't run and get a marriage license right away.
Hmm.
You did that after all the planning and everything was ready.
Hmm.
to do the legality. And you can approach divorce the same way
Hmm.
and get better results because you have.
Right. I mean, we just went to attorneys and, you know, divorced through attorneys. We didn't even go into a courtroom. And then he asked if he could be served at work or at home, not at work. And I said, "Oh yeah, I'll have him. I'll tell the attorney to send it to you at your home." So it all went smoothly for a period of time.
Well, and it's when things are going well is when you want to have the discussion about these potential changes that could shift things. Like I
Mhm.
will talk with my clients about, okay, so what about, do you want to talk about when somebody starts dating again? Because it's better to have the conversations when things are smooth,
Mhm.
because then when they happen, there's already that understanding.
Mhm.
It's like shareholders. When good friends go into business together, I used to have the conversations with them about, okay, do you want to preserve, what happens if things go sideways? Because they often do,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? How important is preserving this relationship? Let's talk about, a shotgun clause.
Mhm. Mhm.
Let's talk about potential outcomes that we can, while you're getting along, this is actually the time to talk about potential conflict down the road.
I think that would be a great topic for our next our next
All
podcast.
right, well, let's plan for it.
Oh, great. I will add with one thing that when I told my former spouse that I wanted a divorce, and he got very upset, and he says, "You're going to take these kids away from me." I said, "Oh, buddy, you're not going anywhere. You're going to help me raise these kids. Okay?"
And I bet that's what shifted everything and made it peaceful. So well done.
It calmed things down. Right,
Mhm.
right. It didn't, there were still some parts that we can talk about in our next podcast. So um, don't jump off, okay?
Okay.
Slam the Gavel podcast, help the public understand what really goes on in these courtrooms. I'm your host, Maryann Petri. You can find me on Spotify, YouTube. Please like and subscribe. Apple, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google, and other platforms I don't know about. And feel free to buy me a coffee to help keep this podcast going. I thank you, Attorney Kim Korven, for coming on. And you're all the way from Calgary, Canada, where you're freezing up there. And we will talk again soon.